and appreciate you coming out. Know that we have many that are missing this morning, and it's like one of those, I guess it's that time of year you come at your own risk type of thing, coming to church. But apparently there's some sickness that's going around, so please be in prayer for those that aren't here, and that they'll recover from whatever it is that's giving them issues. I'm sure that there's more people that would like to be in attendance this morning that aren't. So, but praise the Lord, right? I mean, we got a small group, but I think that from what I've heard is you learn more when it's a smaller group. I don't know. Isn't that kind of the idea with tutoring, you know? One-on-one. So I guess it's kind of like a tutoring class. We've been looking at 2 Kings chapter 9 and the story with Jehu and the young prophet that approaches him, the conspiracy and the coup that follows, and the assassination of two kings, Joram and Ahaziah. We'll read about that here in a minute. Last week, we ended on this note here on what the world thinks about us and their commentary on us. And I'll read this verse in 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 11, to get kind of the context. It says, Then Jehu came forth to the servants of his Lord, and one said unto him, Is all well? Wherefore came this mad fellow to thee? And he said unto them, Ye know the man in his communication. Okay, so we took that reference there of being a mad fellow. We know that's an old English way of saying a crazy person. I mean, and that would be safe if you inserted that in kind of the modern way of speaking. You know how that crazy guy is. That's what he said. I know it's a little different in terms of the terminology, but that's exactly what he means. This guy's crazy. He's referencing the young prophet, right? And then last Sunday went through some passages in Jeremiah and Hosea, and I wanted to look at some of these that we didn't have time to go to, because I think it's important, and I think this is kind of a theme this morning, because I do want to preach about how that your heart is the most important thing, and it's not, you shouldn't be defined by what other people think of you. Amen? And the more that you are driven by what the Lord thinks about you, the more successful you're going to be as a Christian. Because ultimately that's all that matters, right? And I think that's interesting that this kind of theme goes along with the Sunday school psalm, really the open assembly psalm, and then the message to follow. And that is that the world's going to think what they think, right? Did we go to John chapter 10? Do you guys remember that? Well, let's go there anyways, because I think it's important. I think we did go there, but let's go to John chapter 10. And verse 20. Verse 19, there was a division, therefore, again among the Jews for these sayings, and many of them said, He hath a devil and is, what's that word? Mad. Why hear ye him? Others said, These are not the words of him that hath a devil. Also, can a devil open the eyes of the blind? All right, some people are using their logic. Some people were so driven by jealousy towards Jesus Christ that all they wanted to do was see something negative or paint him as in a certain light. And these people were saying that Jesus Christ was crazy. You get that? Now, imagine that for a second. A man who was perfect, who did absolutely nothing wrong. So, you guys remember the story with David, and he got kind of in a pickle with the Philistines and realized that the Philistines might kill him because he made an allegiance with the Philistines. You remember this when he was running from Saul? And he was like, uh-oh, the hammer's fixing to fall. These Philistines are going to kill me because they realize that I'm a huge threat, and it's not worth trying to use me. And you know what he did? You guys remember the story? He let the the drool come down on his beard, and he probably messed up his hair like this, and then it says he like scrabbled on the gate. He acted like a crazy man. And the Philistines probably had, you can read into it a little bit, there was probably a general sentiment, if you're crazy, you're probably devil possessed. And the best thing to do is just kind of usher you out. They didn't kill him. David knew that if he acted crazy, he'd get out of it. So here's a man after God's own heart, the warrior, like Chris was talking about, the king of Israel. And there was a time where he literally acted crazy. You know? Well, Jesus Christ never did that. There was never a time where he had to act like he was crazy to get out of a pickle. He acted completely normal. He never sinned. And then on top of that, his ministry was helping other people. And then these people say, well, he's crazy. So what I want you to understand about that is you can do everything right and literally have your main objective in life to help other people, and people are still going to think things about you that are not right. So say, what do I do about that? Don't worry about what other people think. You know? If it's right to serve the Lord, if it's right to do certain things in your family, or go to church, or pass out tracts, or pray before you eat in a restaurant, whatever. If that's the right thing to do, then that's what you should do, regardless of what other people think. It wasn't long ago that people would paint you as an absolute maniac if you didn't have a mask on your face. You are crazy. You're going to get yourself killed. This is dangerous behavior. And here you are, you're like, well, I don't even understand the science behind it. I feel like that it's doing me more harm than good. And you could not only believe that in your heart, but you could also be verified by actual facts that that's the truth. But the sentiment would be, you are a crazy madman taking your life into your own hands because you didn't have something over your face. So are you going to be a chameleon and just adapt to whatever people want you to be? Or are you just going to go by a higher calling of what the Lord wants you to be and be satisfied with Him being satisfied with you? Okay? And then you have to forgive me. I didn't check off the ones that we looked at, but I'm pretty sure we didn't go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. So turn over there. We're not going to go to all these passages, but it would be good for you to look them up if maybe you're hearing what I'm saying and you're like, well, I don't agree with that. And that's fine. All I'm trying to show you is that in Jesus Christ's day and in Paul's day, they thought these people were off or crazy because they considered Paul a fanatic, a lunatic. They say stuff like, what will this babbler say? I think it was Agrippa that said, much learning hath made thee mad. That's what they said about Paul. So, they said it about Jesus Christ and the greatest Christian that ever lived. Does that mean you're exempt? Probably not. Because now, more than ever, people don't understand living for God or doing something that would be according to the Bible, or being different, not because you want to be different, just because you have a commandment to be different. Let's not forget that the Bible says that we're a peculiar people. Peculiar, we know what that means, right? So if somebody says, man, you seem like you're a little peculiar, you're different. I never heard anybody talk like that, you know. So in my line of work, I've had the privilege to be around guys that have helped me from time to time, right? And some of the guys that I've hired were either friends or acquaintances, people that I have known. And sometimes I worked with guys that, just through happenstance, hey, this guy needs some work. Oh yeah, I'll work you. Come to my house. at such and such a time. And then we'll hop in the truck, and it's just me and him for an hour. You know? Just some guy. Right? Some able-bodied young man. So inevitably, the conversation goes to, you know where it's going to go to. You know? We're going to talk about the Bible. You know? Not because I'm this witnessing machine, but like you're in a car with some guy for an hour, and you know that he's lost. It doesn't take much to eventually get around to that. It's super easy. And especially if that's the case for 2 weeks. Eventually it's going to get brought up. And you know, like this one guy, I was, you know, talking to him, telling him about the Lord, you know, and one day he's like, man, I never met a construction boss like you. Like, he thought I was nuts, you know, like to talk about the Bible. I didn't think it was crazy. And honestly, if that was such a big part of my life, why wouldn't it come out eventually? It wasn't like he just pumped my gas at a gas station for 60 seconds. We're in the car for hours and hours and hours. But my point is that people are going to think that you're different just by being here this morning. And that's not a bad thing. So here's what 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18. The preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness. But unto us which are saved is the power of God. It is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For after that, in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. And he goes on and on. You can keep reading how that God hath chosen the foolish things in the world to confound the wise, verse 27. And the things which are mighty, and the base things, and the things which are, verse 28, despised hath God chosen. This is the way that God set it up. You know, it says in another place, to the Greeks, foolishness. What you're saying to people that are not Jews is a foolish proclamation. You know? And to the Jews, it was a stumbling block. And what is that talking about? That's just talking about a Christian that's willing to preach the gospel. You know, the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness. They're going to think that it's foolish. Why are you talking about that? What is the point? This seems crazy. Amen? The only place in the world that you could go and talk about Jesus Christ dying on the cross and shedding his blood for their sins to a general public that they don't think you're crazy is the Bible Belt. And the only reason that is because they have been taught and told ever since they were little, as far back as they can remember, that that's how you get to heaven. You trust Jesus. So it's familiar to them. But just because it's familiar doesn't mean that it's normal and commonly accepted in the world. You know what I mean? So if you're in that culture, you could think, oh yeah, it's normal to think that you can be saved by trusting in a Jew that lived 2,000 years ago. No, that's not normal at all to hardly anybody. In fact, it's foolishness to the world. It's only normal to people that have been around it all their life. And they don't have to necessarily be saved. They're just conditioned to it. They're used to it. All right, 2 Kings chapter 9 in verse 12. And they said, is it false? Tell us now. So he rushes in there, this young prophet, and anoints Jehu, and then takes off. We read about that in verse 10. He opened the door and fled. And then the other guys come in the room. They say, who is this guy? He's that crazy prophet. You know how he talks. And then the men that were around Jehu said, well, is it true? Did he anoint you, and are you king of Israel now? Right? Tell us now, verse 12. Then he said, thus and thus spake he to me, saying, thus saith the Lord, I have anointed thee king of Israel. Then they hastened and took every man his garment and put it under him on the top of the stairs and blew a trumpet, saying, Jehu is king. I would say that there was probably some discussion or maybe some unrest in the nation of Israel to where a group of men through one proclamation would say, yeah, you're king. I'd say chances are they were sitting around talking about how Jehoram, it was a terrible king, and his kingdom was falling apart. And look at Jehu. Look, you've been around for a good while. Your influence has spread. There's people that trust you, right? More than likely, this was kind of the general feel leading up to this, because if nothing else, you just see the men's response. It says, verse 13, they hastened. Like, they didn't waste any time at all. Took a garment, and they said Jehu is king. Verse 14, so Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, like we talked about last week, that's not King Jehoshaphat of Judah, that's a different man, conspired against Joram. Now Joram had kept Ramoth-Gilead, he and all Israel, because of Hazael, king of Syria. But King Joram was returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which the Syrians had given him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. And Jehu said, if it be your minds, then let none go forth nor escape out of the city to go and tell it to Jezreel. So he wanted it to be a sneak attack. So I know we've made reference to this map a lot, but it's good for the actual timeline that we're in, because it highlights a lot of the cities that are being talked about. And Ramoth-Gilead, right here, see that in the middle of the circle? This was a place of contention. Several times we read about this in the book of 1 Kings. And the Syrians and the Israelites fought over this place over and over again. So this is the Transjordan, right? Gilead on the other side of Jordan. And they're wanting this area, Ramoth-Gilead, and they're fighting over it with Hazael, and of course they lose the battle. And Joram and Ahaziah, it talks about later, they go back over the river Jordan, and you see Jezreel in the center there, just north of Samaria. If you remember Mount Carmel and the contest with Elijah and the prophets and how they fled, remember they took off because of the rain? They were going to Jezreel. This is where either Jezebel lived, or maybe it was a vacation home for her. You know, she probably had several houses, but she was here during this time. She was down in Jezreel. And there's actually a lot of significance to this area in prophecy. Y'all ever heard of the Valley of Megiddo? Okay, so that's that valley. We'll look at a slide here in a minute, but the valley, obviously Mount Carmel, 3,000 feet in the air, and then you see that river, Kishon, that runs there. Let me get this thing here. Did y'all like how slick that was? How it just transferred over? Right here, Mount Carmel, and then this is the Valley of Megiddo. A lot takes place here in this part of the Old Testament. Now, obviously, when it gets to further down, in the New Testament, we talk about Jerusalem, and we can't deny that there's a lot that takes place with Jerusalem and Judah, Bethlehem, all of that. But then, if you read much about the disciples and Jesus Christ's ministry, it's not as much down here. Did you know that? A lot of we talk about Capernaum and those areas. That's all up here by the Sea of Galilee in this area. Right? Okay. Jehu said, if it be your minds, verse 15, then let none go forth and tell it in Jezreel. So Jehu rode in a chariot and went to Jezreel. And Joram lay there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, was come down to see Joram. And there stood a watchman on the tower of Jezreel, and he spied the company of Jehu as he came and said, I see a company. And Joram said, take a horseman and send to meet them, and let him say, is it peace? So there went one on horseback to meet him and said, thus saith the king, is it peace? And Jehu said, what hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, the messenger came to them, but he cometh not again. Okay, this is pretty self-explanatory, right? They see him off in a distance, this company coming, so they send one rider down there, and they want to know what's going on. Is this something we should prepare for? Is it you guys just coming to hang out? What's happening? So they sent the messenger down there, and the messenger, I think that it's pretty safe to say that Jehu had a reputation, right? And a lot of people knew what this guy was all about. He was probably a mighty man of valor, as the Bible describes. And he had a lot of influence. And when this messenger went down and saw it was Jehu, he immediately said, uh-oh, there's trouble coming. And he didn't go back to the two kings. He just met Jehu and joined the company. Verse 19, then he sent out a second on horseback, which came to them and said, thus saith the king, is it peace? And Jehu answered, what hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, he came even unto them, and cometh not again. So once again, the watchman, or the messenger went down there and recognized this is a formidable host. There's going to be a slaughter, and he was going to get on that side of it. So two men decided that they're not going to stick with the king. The watchman told, saying, he came even unto them, and cometh not again. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he driveth furiously. Which I think that's a funny passage, There's some people that I think of whenever I think of crazy driving. I wouldn't have expected it, but my daughter's a pretty crazy driver. Maybe crazy is the wrong word. She's aggressive, which I don't think that she has the skins on the wall to be aggressive, but in any case. This also kind of lends to the idea that people knew who Jehu was and his mannerisms, right? Did you understand that? Can you tell anything about the way that they're coming down? I think that's Jehu because we know how he drives, We know his mannerisms. He maybe even was projecting here in verse 11, calling the young prophet crazy. Jehu may have been crazy. He probably had a reputation that he was a little off. It's hard to read into much of this because there's only so much information. We don't know a lot about Jehu. But if he had the reputation that he drove a certain way, then he probably had some other things that were known about him. Was that fair to say? And also that these men were just so willingly joining over to his side and saying, okay, I'm going to go with Jehu because I know how this is going to go down because I know how Jehu is. Verse 21, Joram said, make ready, and his chariot was made ready, and Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, went out, each in his chariot, and they went out against Jehu and met him in the portion of Naboth the Jezreelite. And it came to pass, when Joram saw Jehu, that he said, is it peace, Jehu? And he answered, what peace? So long as the whoredoms of thy mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many. And Joram turned his hands, which I think is an interesting expression, and fled. What would that look like? Yeah, that's what I was about to say. What would that look like? To me, it was like this. You ever see somebody go like this? Yeah. Maybe that's what he was saying. Like, is it peace? Is it peace, Jehu? Like this. Like everybody slow down. And then he didn't stop this expression when he realized what was going on. He just turned like this and ran the other direction. And Joram turned his hands and fled and said to Ahaziah, there is treachery, O Ahaziah. And Jehu drew a bow with his full strength and smote Jehoram between his arms, and the arrow went out at his heart, and he sunk down in his chariot. Then said Jehu to Bidkar, his captain, take up, and cast him in the portion of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember how that when I and thou rode together, after Ahab his father, the Lord laid this burden upon him. Surely I have seen yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his son, saith the Lord, and I will requite thee in this plat, saith the Lord. Now therefore take and cast him into the plat of the ground according to the word of the Lord. So all this is fulfilled prophecy from everything that happened with Ahab and Jezebel and the sons. I want to say in the first part of chapter 10, look at that in verse 1. And Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. This is an entire entourage of what Ahab had created, not only with his family, but also with the religious practices that he brought into the country himself and through his wife. If you can remember her, she was the daughter of the Ethbaal, the king of the Zidonians. You guys remember that a couple months ago? We've been at this for a while, but what she would be considered was a Phoenician princess, Jezebel. And she had all of those false religious practices. Her dad probably was named after Baal, Ethbaal, right? There's a lot that you can kind of read into that. But in any case, it was a very unholy family. But I do want to point something out here. Do you guys see that in verse 26? I left my paper over here. It talks about the plat of ground. So I don't know how you feel in particular about the King James Bible and what people like to say. That the biggest knock on the King James Bible is that it's Old English, archaic, and hard to understand. That's what I hear from most people, okay? Now, people that dive into it further will say, well, the King James is this, that, or the other, and they'll have other reasons. But on the surface, most people say, well, you need to get a newer version because the King James is hard to understand. It's written in archaic, English, and they have versions that are easier to understand. Okay? And granted, there are expressions, there are things that we don't use it. We already ran across one. It says mad fellow. If somebody came in this room and was acting like a complete lunatic, nobody would, I would venture to say, nobody in this room would say, that's a mad fellow. You know what you would say? That guy's crazy. Or he's a lunatic. Okay, so there are things in the King James Bible, expressions that we don't use. But they don't play both sides of the coin when they go that route. Because there are expressions that we still use that the new versions have completely cast aside. Like this right here, the plat of ground. Have you ever bought a piece of land? And you got a piece of paper and it says plat on it? That is an extremely common phrase. That is the phrase we use when we're referencing a piece of land. Amen? Okay, it's plat is what they say. So here's some things that you should keep in mind. That the King James Bible, not only are there words that we use, obviously, but the King James shaped early American language and culture. How many of y'all knew that? Raise your hand. Okay? The idioms and expressions are replete. There are so many things that you say, your common English language, that are straight taken from the King James that you don't even realize. That's how crazy it is. You don't even realize the expressions that you use. But for example, such things as the powers that be, a thorn in the flesh, by the skin of your teeth, the writing on the wall, all of those come directly from the King James Bible. Nowhere else. Like verbatim from the King James Bible. Moral and ethical language, the King James provided vocabulary for moral and ethical discussions in early America. Because the Bible was so widely read and memorized, its phrases and style influenced everything from political speeches to everyday conversations about right and wrong. Figures like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin often referenced or echoed biblical language in their writings. In colonial America, the King James was one of the primary books used for teaching, reading, and literacy. Its wide availability and familiarity made it a natural choice for educational purposes, embedding its language and cadences deeply into American English. Children learned to read with the Bible, which ingrained its linguistic patterns and phrases into American dialects. This is the history of your culture in your country. We're not talking about, Russia or China or Japan. This is your history, you know? And the book, if you have a King James Bible, if you don't, that's fine. But I think that it's at least should be understood that your culture and your language was derived from that particular book that's in your lap, and not the updated version, not in the New King James or anything like that. The one that we're reading, the text that we're reading this morning. Americans developed their own identity. The King James played a role in shaping views on liberty, justice, and governance. Many colonists viewed their settlement as a promised land narrative, much like the Israelites in the Old Testament. Leaders during the American Revolution used biblical language to argue for independence, reinforcing the King James role in shaping American ideals of freedom and destiny. Many American writers such as Herman Melville, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and later Mark Twain drew on the King James language and themes. Its imagery, symbolism, and storytelling style left a mark on American literature, infusing it with distinct biblical references. So I just think that every once in a while you need to give a little plug for the Bible that we use, in understanding that it's not just necessarily a preference, okay? For us at this church, we believe that God's words are preserved in the King James Bible. And I think it's specifically important to bring instances like this up, like certain words and phrases, because that, like I said at the beginning of this kind of little rabbit trail, that is the biggest mark against the King James Bible, is the phrases and words and the Old English nature of it. Well, I can't understand it. Well, I'll level with you. There are certain phrases, and just the way that Paul himself writes is difficult to understand sometimes. Not necessarily because of the King James, but just because of the way that he wrote things. And there are phrases that may be a little bit different, like Brother Chris mentioned leasing this morning. We don't use the word leasing. But is it that hard to figure out? I mean, you could find out what leasing meant in probably 5 seconds with your phone. It means lying, falsehood, right? Speak leasing. And honestly, through the context, you could probably draw that. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater is what I'm saying. Just because you see or experience something that may be difficult, well, let's remember all the other great things that the King James is responsible for, because it was left in the way that it is. All right? Did we get down to verse 27? Okay, we'll just go ahead. Verse 27, but when Ahaziah the king of Judah saw this, he fled by the way of the garden house, and Jehu followed after him and said, smite him also in the chariot. And they did so at the going up at Gur, which is by Ibleam, and he fled to Megiddo and died there, and his servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in the sepulchre of his fathers in the city of David. In the 11th year of Jehoram the son of Ahab began Ahaziah to reign over Judah. I have another slide here. This gives more detail with this valley. Now, do you guys understand where you're at? We're zooming in on this valley here, right? There's Mount Carmel. So we have Joram and Ahaziah. And Ahaziah in particular, remember Joram got killed like right away, got shot in the chariot. Ahaziah decides he's going to flee in some kind of secret passage, and he's heading this way, across this valley, to Megiddo. Now I would challenge you to try to find some of these places on the map that the Bible talks about. Like, it says Megiddo in that passage, but it also says going up to Gur, which is by Ibleam. I'm not saying those aren't places, but sometimes it's hard to identify exactly where some of these specific areas are on a map. But the more well-known ones like Jezreel, obviously Mount Carmel and Megiddo, you can find. But to me, it's interesting to see what's happening not only on the pages that you're reading, but also in the context of a map, and see what it is that they're doing. So you have Jezreel here, and apparently this is some kind of like trade route. These are different roads or whatever. But then also Samaria is almost directly south of Jezreel. Like we already talked about, they're connected. Samaria would be like the capital, probably where, the castle was or whatever, where the king and queen lived. And then Jezreel happens to be, maybe it's the town where Ahab and Jezebel met, and it had specific significance to them, or you know what I mean? Who knows? But for whatever reason, maybe it had a nice view, or the valley was nice or something, but they spent time down in Jezreel. And verse 30, when Jehu was come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her face and tied her head and looked out at the window. And as Jehu entered in at the gate, she said, had Zimri peace who slew his master? So that's a baited question, right? Zimri, if you look, we won't go back to the reference, but you can see it in 1 Kings. Zimri conspired, I believe, against Baasha. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have that written down. But he only reigned 7 days. Zimri did. Okay? Zimri is Jezebel's grandfather-in-law, if you want to get technical. So it wouldn't be her father-in-law. That would be Omri. And Zimri would be Omri's dad. But in any case, the idea there was, she's making a historical reference. What do you think happened to Zimri whenever he overthrew the powers that be and conspired against his master? Do you want to reign for a week as well? Right? That's what she's saying. It wasn't just, hey, do you guys know the answer to this question? I had a historical question for you guys before you kill me. Do you have an answer? No. She's basically threatening them. You do this and you're not going to last very long. Because Zimri only reigned a week. Verse 32, and he lifted up his face to the window and said, who is on my side? Who? And there looked out to him 2 or 3 eunuchs. I don't know why, but I read this in one of the newer versions, and they changed eunuchs to officials. So I'm sure they have their reasoning. Some of these Bibles change the wording because they feel like it's offensive, or they feel like it's this, that, or the other. A lot of them try to use some kind of random text as proof or validation. But it would make sense that there would be eunuchs around the queen, would there not? If there are men in the company of the queen in that day and time, I'm pretty sure there would be eunuchs. Right? Because it just doesn't make sense that they would be just regular old men hanging out with the queen. As wicked as it was in that area, in that day and time, I think there still was kind of a code of conduct. You don't just hang out with a queen without the husband around, unless, of course, you're a eunuch. And that's typically what they did. So I don't know why they would change it to officials. It makes a lot of sense just knowing the way that things were back in those days, that it would be the eunuch. There's a couple things here. Verse 30, the Bible says that she painted her face. Okay? Now, we don't know exactly the extent that she did that. I would like to know what would be the point of that. That would be the first thing. So was it coincidental that she happened to paint her face that day and Jehu came? Or did she hear about Jehu coming and she decided, I'm going to paint my face? Was this like a Halloween costume type of thing? Or was this like a seductive thing? Was it that she thought she could be persuasive to Jehu to not come and execute vengeance on her if she appeared to be pretty and attractive? I feel like these are legitimate questions. Was she trying to scare him? Did she paint her face up like a clown? The other question would be, by her painting the face, is that a pretty close comparison to a woman putting on makeup? Because I can absolutely see an independent Baptist taking this and using it as a proof that women should not wear makeup. By the way, I don't believe that, but I'm just kind of rolling with what we got here, I will say, with that in mind, we don't have time to run the references. We only have a couple minutes left. but Proverbs 6:25, Ezekiel 23:40, and Jeremiah 4:30 are all references to painting either the face or the eyes, and in every case it reflects vanity and spiritual unfaithfulness. So if you're looking for a good verse to use makeup, you're probably going to have a hard time finding one. Oh, okay. Are you talking about Leah probably? Yeah. And just to be clear, I don't think it's wrong to wear makeup, right? I think it's perfectly fine. If there's a reference that you could go to, it's in Peter. It talks about overly adorning yourself, right? And people use it, once again, some people use that as a reference. Well, you shouldn't wear jewelry or whatever, but the idea there is that you're overdoing it. And that's something that women should not do. So I think that that's probably safe. When it comes to appearance and presenting yourself, whether you're a man or a woman, but we understand that men fall in love with what they see, right? And women are better looking than men, right? So it's more important for them to look a certain way. Therefore, they present themselves a certain way. So it's important for the ladies to understand where the line is. And the line would be overly doing it, like overdoing it. Does that make sense? Modest would be a good word. So this isn't to say don't paint your face or don't put makeup on. We're bringing this back around to say when you do prepare to look presentable to other people, the goal should be modesty, right? And to not overdo it. And that, honestly, is between you and your husband. It has nothing to do with me. Thank God for that. All right. But yeah, I think we're pretty much done. We don't want to get into the next thing. I wanted to talk about the eunuchs. Actually, we have a couple minutes. Is that clock correct? I know that the minutes are correct. Okay, so we have a couple minutes to go through this next slide of eunuchs in the Bible, and this could be kind of fun for you guys, right? This is more or less a trivia. Forget about the eunuchs part. This is just Bible trivia. Now, in Matthew 19:12, it talks about three different types of eunuchs. It says one that was born that way, okay, birth defect. It talks about a eunuch that was made a eunuch by a man, which is the case with what we're talking about here, more than likely, the eunuchs around the queen. And then you have a eunuch that has spiritually made himself a eunuch, has decided to not get married for the ministry, right? And that's basically just a kind of a commitment that he made to God. I'm not going to get married. And the Bible would consider them a eunuch in that sense. So if you want the reference, that's what it is, Matthew 19:12. I hit the button once, so I expect it to come up twice if I hit it again. Maybe I can get some help back there for the Chris. Just do the first one. Bigthan, and Teresh. Kings, chamberlains who kept the door. Anybody have an idea where in the Bible that is found? These are both eunuchs. Did you just Google that? Okay. Had to ask because he's got a. But you also have the answers in front of you. Okay, good job. Good job. Sorry to doubt you. Go ahead and click the next one. The answer. Suspense. Esther chapter 2. These two tried to assassinate Ahasuerus, and the whole plot was thwarted by Malachi. Do y'all remember that story? Okay, so those were those two individuals, Bigthan, I'm sure I'm butchering that name, and Teresh. Next one. No, bro, you're messing it up. Was visited by an evangelist in a chariot near Gaza. This would probably be the more popular one. But you also saw the answer, right? Okay, so this is the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8, verses 26 through 40. What must I do to be saved? Remember that? Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. All right. Actually, he says, if thou believest with all thine heart. I'm confusing that with Acts 16. But it's the same message. Next one. All right, now who can guess what the next one is? All right, Haggai, king's chamberlain, keeper of the woman. Any idea where that's found in the Bible? Chris, you can't answer. Hey, that's a good guess. It's not correct, though. Anybody else? It is in the Old Testament. Johnny, good job. Also in Esther, also in the same chapter. So this was a guy who gave Esther good advice to obtain the king's favor. Hey, this is a little ironic because you know what he probably told Esther? Don't overdo it. He's going to like you for who you are. Remember when she presented himself to the king? So maybe his admonition was, hey, Esther, you should just be modest, you know? And maybe some of these other ladies were just going crazy, you know, with their outward adorning. And then lastly, this eunuch escaped in a basket, changed his name and religion, but was still caught and executed. Anybody? See, I don't know that happened in the Bible. Who said Paul? Corey, very good. Paul the Apostle. Now, you have to understand that he wasn't the same type of eunuch, right? But he made the decision to not get married. Now, I tried to make that as encrypted as I could, because everybody knows about Paul. But those things are true, are they not? His name was changed. His religion was changed. He was executed. And he had that kind of crazy thing that happened where he was on the wall and they let him down in a basket there at the beginning. And I think Acts 9 or 10 or something. Okay. Let's go ahead and close in word of prayer. Lord, thank you for